Okay, good evening, everyone. Looking forward to part 2 of the heroes of Megillat Esther. Really uncovering what's the background, what's going on in the Megillah. Maybe a bit of a new take, what we've seen till now. Last week, we discussed something very specific about both Mordechai and Esther, a good discussion. And today I want to take a little bit of a different spin on the story. Although it's going to be somewhat based on the main pasuk we focused on last week, but a bit of a different take. So let's see how we go with that. As always, this is an interactive class, so open for discussion, open for thoughts and ideas. Got a couple of sources up on the screen, and let's see how we go with it. So we all know the Megillah story, and I don't know if it's strange, but if you look at the name of the Megillah, the name of Megillah is Megillat Esther. Now, who wrote the Megillah? So, well, the pasuk says, "Vatichtov." Both Mordechai and Esther were the ones who authored the Megillah. So why is it that we call Esther, kind of the main character? She gets the headlines, and Mordechai almost gets sidelined when we talk about Esther. We did mention last week the Gemara that Esther was the one who actually initiated the process, or establishing the process that every year there will be a Megillah reading on Purim. And so really, if she's kind of the instigator, kind of makes sense that it's called Megillat Esther, even though Mordechai wrote it with her. However, I want to take a few minutes to be able to try and understand who was Esther, what was her personality like. I'd like to take a few moments to analyze her personality. And as always a pleasure when we have Ron with us, because if there's any psychological mistakes we have, we've got Ron to kind of keep us on track. But besides for that, there seems to be a change in her personality, almost like the Esther that we know from what we know from the Megillah, at least, at the beginning of the story, is a very different Esther that we know at the very end of the story. So let's have a look at the text together and see where we're going with this. So what do we know about Esther? Her background, her history. We know her as the mysterious queen. But what do we know about her? What do we know about her personality? Right at the beginning of the Megillah. So the first time we come across Esther is in the second chapter, Perek Bet, Pasuk Zayin, chapter 2, Pasuk 7. If you look at source 1 on the screen, Vahi Omenet Hadasa, Ki Esther Bat Dodo, Ki En La Av Va'em. Mordechai, foster father of Hadassah. Hadassah, Esther, her real name was Hadassah. She's referred to as Esther in the Megillah. The Gemara talks about that. Esther, simply put, as the mysterious queen. Kind of don't really know. The whole theme of Purim is kind of, we're trying to unmask what's going on, unmasking HaKadosh Baruch Hu's ways, God's mysterious ways, and understanding that he's putting the strings throughout the story of Megillat Esther. I told my kids on the way home from school today, not for nothing did they remove the mask mandate tomorrow, just in time for Purim, because that's the whole theme of the Megillah, that we're trying to remove the mask from the Purim story, trying to uncover.
Except for shard setting.
No, I'm not talking about the shul. I'm talking about the government. I didn't say what the shul's policy was. Either way, not to go off point, the idea, the concept of Esther was that the idea behind the story, she was taken on by her uncle Mordechai. Ki en la av'em, for she had no father nor mother. They had died at childbirth. והנערה יפת תואר טובת מראה, she's very beautiful. ומות אביה ואימה, and when her father and mother died, לקחה מרדכי לא לבד. Mordechai adopted her as his own daughter. Okay, so what sort of picture do we have? Esther, the orphan, Esther who's been taken in by the generosity of Mordechai, her faithful uncle, and he basically brings her up. Okay, next pasuk, pasuk Yud, pasuk 10. Lo higida Esther. So what happens? She gets taken to the palace, and obviously not by choice. In fact, the Rashim bring that there was by threat of death, the king decreed that no one's allowed to hide any marriageable maiden in the country, in the kingdom, and she was eventually ushered off to the palace into the hands of Haggai, Shomer Hanashim, and instantly she finds favor in everybody's eyes. And meanwhile, they ask her, "No, can you fill out the form? What's your name?" Says the pasuk, the mysterious queen or the mysterious girl at this point. Lo higida Esther et amavet mrodta. Esther did not reveal her people or her birthplace. Ki Mordechai tziva aleha shelo tagid. For Mordechai had told her not to reveal. It almost sounds like that Esther doesn't have much of her own. She is a shy girl. She's perhaps a passive woman who is an orphan, who was raised by her uncle, and her uncle tells her to do something, she's going to do it. It's not so much, activism. No, it's not, forthcoming in any way, shape, or form, from her own right. It's all kind of, Mordechai told her not to say. Don't say, "What's your name?" Quiet. Why? Mordechai told me. It's interesting to know, I want to go on a bit of a tangent for a few minutes. What are your thoughts? What was the point of Esther not saying, where she came from? Anyone? What was the idea behind it?
Well, it was by orders of Mordechai.
Again?
Mordechai ordered her not to say.
Yeah, why? Why? What's the point? Was there any specific reason? Is this a strategy? Is it just some sort of a form of secrecy?
Well, I think he didn't want that her road to the palace be hindered by her origins.
So you're suggesting that this was all part of a strategic plan? Esther actually wanted to become the queen of Persia, but in order not to hinder it, so she didn't say her name. Is that what you're suggesting?
I don't think that it's a matter of what she wanted. It's a matter of it was by decree, and Mordechai saw it as an opportunity to improve the position of the Jews by having a Jewish queen, but he didn't want her to say that she was Jewish because it might be more of an obstacle rather than an asset, and
very interesting.
Bring it at the right moment.
Okay, we'll see something along those lines in the Ibn Ezra soon, shortly. Anybody else want to share why Asher lo tagid ki Mordechai tziva aleha? Mordechai said, "Don't reveal." Why not? And Linda, just to point out that your suggestion is not mainstream. I'm not saying it's wrong. In fact, the Ibn Ezra suggests that, but
it's more of my experience, my personal experience, because when I've been here in Canada, many times I kept my origins hidden until there was, no belet brera. But I kept it hidden, and not only that, when I was in a place of work, that they hired me because I was Jewish, because they wanted me to sell Jewish customer, which none of them bought, by the way, um, uh, I discovered that there were many Jewish ladies that worked there for a while that hid the fact that they were Jewish. And it's only because something happened to me and they all came with their support.
So why, Linda? Why were they hiding the Jewish? They're worried about anti-Semitism. What's the bottom line?
Yes, of course, there's always anti Semitism.
All
There
right.
was anti Semitism since Egypt.
Right. No, I definitely agree with you. Maybe just a little bit after that, anti-Semitism came down the world. The Gemara says by Har Sinai she'adas sinah laolam. But yeah, that's definitely a very good point. Okay, anybody else?
It's envy. I mean, can you imagine? I mean, now that you mentioned Har Sinai, can you imagine how jealous Umot HaOlam or whoever is that knew about the Ma'amad Har Sinai, how jealous they were that they considered us slaves and we got the word of God, we got the revelation of God, but they forgot who Abraham was, and he was a big chief among the nations. I mean, I can prove it.
Right, I don't want to maybe go off topic. That is a very important concept, and the concept of anti-Semitism. And I think you're right. There is a piece to that. That is definitely the way the Ibn Ezra goes. Maybe not anti-Semitism per se. We'll see that in the Ibn Ezra inside in a minute. Just wondering if there's anybody else who has a different approach, and then we'll elaborate a little bit on what you said.
Well, I really have no idea, but
You've never had the experience of going to the palace and trying to be the queen.
but you know, I'm just guessing here. I mean, does it have to?
I think you're a queen, Meyer.
Oh, thank you.
That's it. You got the ticket.
That's it. But does it have to do something not really her background, in fact that she's Jewish and so forth, but can it be that it has to do more with her relationship with Mordecai? In other words, you know, that maybe they were related, or maybe that she was connected to Mordecai, and that would somehow bias the king in either a positive or a negative way, or you know, something like that.
That is very interesting. That okay, so just going to back you up a little bit there. I never maybe took it this way, but I want to back you up with one point, and that is later on, at the very end of the story, Pasuk says that Esther actually reveals. Just want to read you the Pasuk. Okay. If you look at chapter 8, so, you know, it's a very dramatized story. It's actually a fascinating story. The whole concept of this, you know, the whole script of Megillat Esther is just a fascinating story, and there's so much action happening, and, you know, quite emotionally tugging. It's a very beautiful story. But you look at chapter 8. So just after Haman gets hung, you know, Esther's just pointed to Haman as being the guy behind the plot, and Ahasuerus loses his plot, and ultimately Haman gets hanged on the gallows which he prepared to Mordechai. Next pasuk. On that day, King Ahasuerus gave to Esther, Queen Esther, the house of Haman, the antagonist of the Jews. And Mordechai came in front of the king, and here's the key words: Ki higida Esther mahula, because Esther told him what her connection to him is. which almost sounds like, okay, there's no point in secrecy anymore because now it's all over. It's all good. We're good to go. So we seem to have this very clear connection between Esther and Mordechai, and like almost Esther not kind of revealing herself until this point, because there's some sort of connection, or we don't want that connection to come out. Everybody knows who Mordechai is. Mordechai is always standing at the palace gate. He was one of the ministers of the king, quite a famous personality, both from the Jewish side, an activist from the non-Jewish perspective. You know, there's lots going on. So, Mar, I like what you're suggesting, and you have a pasuk seemingly to support you. Okay, last call for anyone to suggest anything else. Okay, let's go ahead. So let's see what Rashi says. So Rashi, just interesting. Rashi on this pasuk says, "Ashalot tagid kedei sheyomru shehi mishpacha bezuya v'shalchuha." This is just a practical thing. This is Mordechai's daughter. According to Gemara, it could be his wife. Whatever way you want to go, but either way, they wanted to make sure that she won't be taken as the queen of Persia. Why? Because if they would have known that this girl, this woman is of royal blood, the granddaughter of Shaul HaMelech, then they're going to want to, keep her. But seemingly from Rashi, it's a simple strategy. Don't say who you are. You're some loser who just just kind of came off the street. Nobody knows who she is. She doesn't know perhaps herself who she is and her background. Inappropriate, unfit for royalty, and therefore hopefully she'll be sent back home without any problems. Okay? All right, interesting. Rashi. Just want to point out one Ibn Ezra. Ibn Ezra has 3 opinions, and I just thought it was interesting just before we continue, just to kind of give us a bit of background. Ibn Ezra says as follows. Yesh omrim ki Mordechai lo asa nechona shetziva al Esther shelo tagid amar. Some say that that Mordechai did something inappropriate when he told Esther not to reveal where she came from. Why did he do it? Ki pachad shelo yikachen hamelech leisha im yeda should be shehi. Maybe it's shehu as well. Me'agola. It could be that he was worried that if the king finds out that she has got background from the Gola, they just came out from exile, then again it's just not going to happen. It's a bit like what Linda was saying. This is complete opposite of Rashi. Rashi seems to suggest that the reason why she's not revealing anything is because she wants to go home. Ibn Ezra suggests the first idea which he puts forward is the reason why Esther is not revealing her name is the exact opposite reason. Mordechai wants her to get the job. So don't disclose any information which may kind of, bring down the level of success. Perhaps, let's keep it quiet, As Samuel says, less is more. Don't stay in that way. You're good to go. One perush, one understanding.
Rabbi, just as a quick question here, isn't hiddenness implicit within her name? Doesn't her name sort of, in her, presumably her parents named her with some insight into some aspect of her character or what she would be in her life? And maybe there was an understanding that Mordechai had based on that she should remain secret. That was her nature, to be secret. And possibly without even knowing a real reason why at that point, that somehow it was her character.
Or her destiny kind of thing. So 2 points to that. Point number 1 is, if I'm not mistaken, Esther and Mordechai both non-Jewish names. They're both actually Persian names. And although the Gemara does suggest that, Esther min Torah minayin, where do you find the source of Esther in Torah? The pasuk says, "Nuchi Esther, Esther panai mehem," that this concept of God, closing himself, not revealing himself to the Jewish people, and that's where Esther is implied in the pasuk. But essentially, her real name was maybe not just a Jewish name. Secondly, the Gemara says, as someone pointed out before, that her real name was Hadassah. I mean, is that to say that what you said is not true? Not at all. I think you're 100% right. The fact that the Gemara suggests that the source of Esther comes from this pasuk of not being revealed definitely does give us some sort of understanding or insight into her name. But just, want to put it out there in terms of the reality of what the origins of her name was. Good point. Second explanation given by the Ibn Ezra, Vacharim Amru, Ki b'derech nevuah b'chalom yadash tavot Shua Yisrael. Second explanation Ibn Ezra gives is because somehow, either through prophecy, some sort of dream, Mordechai knew that there would be some sort of salvation through Esther for the Jewish people. It's interesting because he doesn't really explain then, okay, so why does she have to keep secret? He doesn't really explain over here what the reason is over here. It almost sounds like it's based off the other one. Like, don't say what's going on because I know, says Mordechai, that the salvation has to come through Esther. So based on the first reason, he wants to make sure that her chances are going to be really high up. Last but not least, Ibn Ezra says, "V'hanachon be'enai," but the real reason, which I think is the most appropriate, is ki asa ze Mordechai did this, ba'avur tishmor Torat Hashem beseter, so that Esther would be able to keep her customs and the Torah in private. Shlo tochal nevelot, that she won't eat any non-kosher food. Tishmor Shabbatot, and she should be able to be shomer Shabbat. V'lo yargishu mishartim kim yodea davar shema melech chachilchena yehargena ki bal korchan pesach. And he goes on. It's very interesting. He says Mordechai was Migdolei Israel. He was very close in terms of his ministerial position. Bottom line is, Ibn Ezra suggests that this is just a strategy to make sure to enable Esther to be able to keep what's going on. In fact, the Gemara says Esther, when she got 7 people, 7 ladies in waiting, the way she dealt with it was she called every one of them, a different day. Sunday, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, Shabbat. Or she told each one, you're going to work on Sunday, you're going to work on Monday, you're going to work on Tuesday, and so on and so forth. That way, each one of them won't know what her diet looks like. And she didn't have 7 people, working for her every day. She had 1 person every day. That way, Sundays wouldn't know what her diet was on Monday. Today, she's in the middle of salad. Tomorrow, she's also in the middle of salad. The next day as well. But the first Sunday doesn't know what's happening on Tuesday. Tuesday doesn't know what Friday's menu is, and so on and so forth. That's one explanation. And the other thing which he did, in which the Gemara says Esther did, was she also knew that way that she can keep Shabbat, and she'll know so-and-so, the 7th one would be Shabbat. So whenever she comes, she would never lose count of the calendar to know when Shabbat is, because she knew this person would remind her of Shabbat. So this is, the Ibn Ezra, just an interesting point, why she's keeping quiet. But let's go back to the simple text of the Psukim, which seems to be that Mordechai is issuing orders, if you will, pretty much telling her exactly what to do. And she, this meek, quiet, shy little girl, who's raised as an orphan by her dear uncle, is faithful to her uncle and not uttering a pipsqueak, pretty much. Not only that, Mordechai being the ever-protective uncle, Pasuk Yud Aleph, Pasuk 11, ובכל יום ויום מרדכי מתהלך לפני חצר בית הנשים, לדעת את שלום אסתר ומה יעשה בה. And every day, Mordechai goes to see if he can get a glimpse. Don't forget, he had an open ticket to go around the palace area. And he goes to see if he can catch her on the balcony and see how she's doing, Umayase about what's happening to her. Interesting to note, the Ibn Ezra we just mentioned, if you look just above, Et Shalom Esther, practically, Mordechai, the caring, loving uncle, Im hi tzricha larofim, which may need a doctor. She's feeling well. Mordechai is just practically looking after her, physical, mental health perhaps, just making sure everything's okay. She's alone in the palace, this vast palace, bit of a tyrant of a king, bit of a crazy guy. She never wants to go there. She's alone, and he just wants to make sure everything's okay. Again, almost sounds like Big Daddy is trying to make sure everything's okay with sweet little Esther. You would think that after she becomes queen, she may kind of shed her shyness and maybe take on a bit of a new role. But no, look later on, Pasuk Chaf, source number 6, En Esther magedet molad tavet ama. Esther continuously does not reveal her kindred, vet ama, or her people, kasher tziva alea Mordechai, as Mordechai had instructed her. Vet mamar Mordechai Esther osa, and Esther obeys Mordechai's bidding, kasher hayeta be'omna ito, as she had done when she was under his tutelage. Very faithful, very clear. Esther is not taking any serious position. She wants to continue being this passive woman, passive princess, who is a kind of, that's the picture we get of Esther, overall. What's very strange is, there's a certain point in the Megillah where Esther's passivity suddenly flips. Where do we see that? Well, straight away, Esther initiates, when she hears about Haman's decree, Vatomer Esther Ashil Mordechai, Pasuk 15. Go and assemble all the Jews who live in Shushan, and fast on my behalf, do not eat or drink for 3 days, nights or day. I and my maidens will observe the same fast, so we know as Tanit Esther, 3 days. And then I shall go to the king, though it is contrary to the law, and if I am to perish, I shall perish. Esther suddenly takes a very, very strong, position, a go-getter. This is, I'm now changing my stance. Not only that, the Avor Mordechai, Vayas kechol asher tzivita alav Esther. Mordechai, what does he do? Whatever Esther commanded, now Mordechai is taking instructions from Esther. Later on in the story, Vatan Esther Amokah Tomar. So this is after the second party. She's in front of King Achashverosh and Haman, and Achashverosh says, "No, my dear queen, what can I do for you?" Second time, I'm waiting for your request. What's the deal? Vatomer, she says, if it pleases your majesty, if your majesty will do me a favor. And if it pleases your majesty, give me my life, may my life be granted as my wish. And my people as my request. She's now begging on behalf of the entire Jewish people. For we have been sold, my people and I. For we are to be destroyed, massacred, and exterminated. Had we only been sold as bondmen and bondswomen, I would have kept silent, for the adversary is not worthy of the king's trouble. Okay? Again, Esther is now the initiator, the instigator, the one who's going forward, the one who's going to save the Jewish people. And he listens to her, Haman gets killed, and further, again, the emotion being elaborated over here by the Megillah. Esther spoke to the king again, falls at his feet, and he's weeping and beseeches him to avert the evil plotted by Haman Ha'agagi, and what he planned on to do to the Jewish people. I think it's pretty much very clear that from the beginning of the story, Esther, the quiet, orphan who's really passive is now taking a very strong stand and ultimately will be the savior of the Jewish people, the activist, the go-getter. Really, she's really turned around a bit. What's kind of also just interesting to analyze, if you look at Mordechai at this part of the story, after he's kind of initiated and he listens to the fast and all that, we know there's one story which kind of kicks in the middle, which is one of the psukim we read aloud in the synagogue. We read together because that is really the beginning of the Yeshua, of the salvation, and that is the story of Achashverosh, who can't sleep at night. He's got insomnia, and he asks him to bring the chronicles, and they find that he hadn't been given any reward to Mordechai for saving his life because of the poisoning of Bitan and Teresh. So ultimately, he gets Haman. Haman just comes through the door, and Haman suggests a very good idea to give the guy some real honor on the king's horse and dressed in king's clothes and the crown. And he's thinking to himself, it's really for him. And somebody running in front of him shouting, "This is who we do to someone who the king favors." And Achashverosh turns around to Haman, says, "Do exactly what you said, and do it to Mordechai the Jew." Wow, Haman is stunned, doesn't like this whole turn of events, but ultimately he knows this is the end of the road. He has to do what he has to do. So Mordechai, in this position, now it's very interesting. You would maybe think that Mordechai is not going to take a very serious stand or whatever, and you don't find that anywhere through the Megillah, from now to almost the end of the Megillah, other than when Mordechai is called and Esther is doing all the talking. Mordechai now becomes very passive. Vayikach Haman pasuk, chapter 6, pasuk 11, 12. Vayikach Haman talabush v'tasus. Haman took the garb and the horse. Vayalbeshet Mordechai, and he dressed Mordechai. Vayarkiveu b'rchov ha'ir, and he proclaimed, and he parades him through the city streets. Vayikra lefanav kacha ye'aseh la'ish asher hamelech chafetz bikaro. And he calls out, "This is what is done for the man whom the king desires to honor." Okay, Mordechai is just sitting there on this horse. He's just been fasting, the poor guy. He has his haircut done. He has new clothes put on. He has a bath, all done by by Haman. And he goes onto this horse, gets paraded around, and then next, and Mordechai just goes back home to the king's gate, or essentially returns to the king's gate where he was till now. Meanwhile, and Haman hurries home, his head covered in mourning. Again, contrast. Beginning of Megillah, Esther's passive. The end of the Megillah, Esther's very active. By contrast, Mordechai at the beginning of the Megillah is the active one, and it sounds like the end of the Megillah, he's kind of passive. Interesting observation. So the question really is, what point triggered this change in Esther? And perhaps if it triggered this change in Esther, the fact that we call Megillat Esther, not Megillat Esther and Mordechai, is because of who Esther was, and maybe this is the savior of the story, the true hero of the story. So what is it, and maybe how does that relate to us? So the critical part where Esther kind of switches takes place over here. Chapter 4, pasuk 4. Haman's just decreed his, final solution. Vatavona na'arot Esther sarisea, and Mordechai is now sitting in sackcloth. It's probably made headlines. Everyone knows about it. And seemingly, the next pasuk is Vatavona na'arot Esther sarisea vayagidula. Esther's maidens and ladies in waiting come and inform her what's going on. But she becomes very agitated. The backdrop to this conversation is she sees Mordechai's, or she gets told Mordechai's wearing the sackcloth. She gets very upset, and she sends a new bunch of clothing to Mordechai, and that's what kind of agitates her. So it says in the pasuk. What seems quite strange is that you would think Esther, in this position, she hears such a thing, that she would be agitated because of the decree. There's a war going on. There is a potential threat looming over her nation, over the entire Jewish people in all 127 provinces of King Ahasuerus' reigning over. And what she's bothered about? Yeah, but Mordechai is wearing sackcloth. That's what bothers her, not the fact that Haman made this decree. It's very interesting. Next pasuk, pasuk Zayin, pasuk 7 and 8. So she sends the message to Mordechai. Mordechai sends the message back. Mordechai sends back to the messenger, tells him all the details and nitty-gritty details of the story. How Haman really is trying to, wipe them out. And to show Esther and inform her and charge her, to go to the king, to appeal to him, and to plead with him for her people. So Mordechai is basically telling Esther at this point, listen up, this situation, I don't know if you've heard the news, I don't know if you're completely aware of what's going on, but this is the reality. Now go to the king, take the opportunity, you're the queen, get in there and do something about it. And Esther's response is somewhat baffling, but if you kind of try and fit it into her personality, maybe it makes a little bit of sense. Esther was this kind of passive, very shy, meek young girl who doesn't really have much of her own thing to say. She's just getting guidance from Mordechai. Yes. I don't know who I am. I'm not saying who I am. I'm not saying who my people are. And Mordechai said, okay, now go up to the king and basically put your life in danger because you may have an opportunity to save the entire Jewish people. And the pasuk says, her response is as follows. Pasuk Yud pasuk 11. כל עבדי המלך ועם מדינות המלך יודעים אשר כל איש ואישה אשר יבוא אל המלך אל החצר הפנימית אשר לא יקרא. Everyone knows, every man, every woman knows that if you enter the king's presence without having been summoned, there is but one law for him. He is put to death. Unless the king extends a golden scepter to him, then he'll live. And I haven't been summoned to the king for the last 30 days. I can't jeopardize my personal position for the entire Jewish people. Everyone knows it's almost akin to, asking for the death sentence. Again, in context, Esther is saying, me, it's just not going to work. It's just not happening. This is like you asked me to do something very serious. This is not me. I'm wondering if anybody else has got maybe a different understanding of what's going on over here. Is it just, it's not me? Or is it that I understand there is, a very big looming threat over the Jewish people. But what about me? I have my own personal skin in this game, literally. And if I just go there, I can be off with my head, and that's the end of the road. So I don't know if it's the right thing for me to do, to go and jeopardize my life just to save some other people. Anyone reflect on that? Or is that not the way you're going with this? How did people understand the conversation between Esther and Mordechai? It's obviously not simple. Otherwise, Megillah wouldn't be just, telling us a history book, right? We spoke about this many times. There's every word is weighed over here. Esther Ruach HaKodesh name, right? It was written in Ruach HaKodesh. So the conversation over here has a lot of underpinnings. What seems to be from the Megillah, and we're not going with Medrashim now and Gemarot and all that. I want to understand from what we have in the simple text that we have, Kipshuto. What is the conversation between Mordechai and Esther? What is Mordechai telling Esther to do? And what is Esther suggesting she can't do it? For what reason? Anyone?
I mean, the reason is that she fears for her life and to anger the king.
Okay, you're saying just practically. She's scared about her own life.
And she's scared to anger the king to make the situation worse.
Oh, you're throwing in something else over here. The king doesn't know who she is, by the way. Yeah, we don't know that the king is aware that she's Jewish at this point.
But in terms of like long term.
Okay. That's a very interesting position. And you think she is right for what she's doing? Do you think that's a fair position for her to take? Put it that way.
I mean, what, that she's afraid to go?
Yeah.
She's
worried about her life.
Well, the thing is, it's like she gets over her fear when she realizes.
Okay, so we'll see that in a minute. But I'm saying at this point, she's putting forward a very serious position. Let's bring it down to something a little more practical. I mean, last week we spoke.
And she was, as we said, she's meek and and obedient. So here we have a clash of that she's got to navigate between the law, which means immediate death to anyone who comes uninvited, and Mordechai's request or command. So there is, I mean, there is the law of the court, and Mordechai asked her to break the law. So it's a dilemma.
So okay,
and she expresses
that's a very serious position, right? That's a very serious dilemma.
Yeah.
Which she's being faced with. Let's bring it down to something practical. Last week we spoke about the current crisis in Ukraine and Russia. Many of the rabbis who had the opportunity to flee the country in Ukraine have decided they're not leaving. They are going to, at personal sacrifice, stay with people who don't have the opportunity to leave. Is that a halachically acceptable position? This is a very, very strong.
Well, yes. Even Hatzalah people went to Ukraine, and so basically it's when okay, so when she realized that the fate of her people rests on her, she forgets about herself and about the law. So it's the same thing. The rabbis that went to Ukraine and the Hatzalah that went to Ukraine, they know that there's something greater than them that requires their presence.
So you're jumping ahead of the story. I'm talking about this part of the story where Esther has a very serious position. She is suggesting, according to what you're saying at least, that her personal position of, her life is at stake. We're in trouble over here. And therefore, I understand there may be a bigger picture over here, but who said that I'm supposed to be the one to go and do this? Is that a justified position in Yahadut, in Judaism? Anyone?
I don't know. I don't know. I mean, that could have been what was happening here, or her goal here is to save the Jewish people, right? Mordecai says you got to go to the king, so she's thinking, okay, if I go to the king now, and if I get killed, then what good does it do? It does nothing, right? So I think maybe she's just voicing it out loud and thinking to herself, well, we need a better plan. It's not that my life is more important than everybody else, and therefore I'm going to save my life. Maybe that's not what it is. Maybe it's more strategy. Is this really the right strategy? What's our goal here? We have to save the Jewish people. If I just go and get killed, then what's the point?
Okay, so that's a very good point. If you look at the Megillah, seemingly, we don't have to be so radical. That's just literally voicing a practical, conversation. Like, how practical is it for me to, or how helpful is it? Either what Linda said before, the king might, in the long term might find out and it might jeopardize the Jewish people even more, although I'm not sure how it can jeopardize more, because if they're all going to be killed, there's not much more to jeopardize. But, or just practically, it might not be helpful right now. Maybe, if I'm there on the quiet, later on I could help even better, so on and so forth. However, if you look at the following psukim, with Mordechai's response to Esther, I think it seems very clear that is not her position. Mordechai almost slams her so hard, it's almost difficult to read. And the pasuk goes as follows, this pasuk we mentioned last week as well. Vayomer Mordechai lahashiv el Esther, chapter 4, pasuk Yud 13. And Mordechai sends the message back. Don't forget, this is all messages going backwards and forwards. Esther's in the palace, Mordechai's outside the palace, and this is how the communication is going. Al tedami benafshech lehi malet bet hamelech mikol hayehudi. Do not imagine that you of all the Jews will escape with your life by being in the king's palace. What's Mordechai saying here? Let's read one more pasuk. Kim hacharesh tacharishi, on the contrary, if you keep quiet and silent in this crisis, revach v'hatala yamod laYehudim makom acher. You should know the Jews will never perish. But you know who will perish? And deliverance will come to the Jews from another place. Hashem has his plans. Hashem has his guarantee. But va'at ubet avich tovedu. But you and your father's house will perish. And then Mordechai throws in, Umi yodea, just to have you know. Who knows? Im le'et kazot higat lemachut. How do you know that you're in this position simply because of such a crisis and you're supposed to take a stand? But just before I just take a question, the position which Mordechai is framing this, and there is a discussion in the Rishonim exactly how to frame this. I'll mention in a minute. But the way Mordechai understands the communication, at least, is that Esther's suggesting that, listen, there's a crisis out there with the Jewish people. But guess what? I am in the palace and I will be okay. And she says to Mordechai, I should jeopardize my life? I can't do that. I understand it's a big responsibility, but listen, I can't do this. This is that personal sacrifice. To which Mordechai responds, if you don't go, you think you're going to be saved? You're not going to be saved. You think you're going to get away off the hook with this one? This is everyone. And how do you know that your position of power, which you're in now, is not there simply to help everybody else?
I read it a little differently. I hadn't really thought a lot before this class, but when just reading, I mean, since last year, but then I was too drunk, Anyway, so just dialing back to Esther, it doesn't seem like she's really being emotional. It seems like she's just stating fact. Oh, I haven't been summoned for 30 days. And she's just stating fact. And it doesn't seem like it's really, fueled by emotion. But Mordechai seems to be misreading her as though I think it's a misreading of her that he's doing. Her statement is basically, if I had to think of it strategically, she's stating fact. I don't see her as being fearful or somehow thinking that she's going to be okay because she's in the palace. I just basically think that if I could sort of put myself inside her head, she's thinking that people have to really be mobilized. People have to really care. And that she's leading reading Mordecai to be reactive to her so that she's then in a position to say, fine, this is what you have to do. You have to fast for 3 days and, but she's basically, I think that she's keeping her cool through all this, and she knows what's going on and he doesn't know what's going on. And this is, again, continuing with that theme of her really being a hidden gem here. She knows what's going on, but she doesn't feel that the Jewish community right now in Persia has what it takes, and they need to be motivated, they need to be focused, they need to believe more in themselves, and that her communication is designed to get Mordecai to be her agent out there to do that for her. So she's the brains behind all this, the way that I'm sort of seeing it.
So I think you're basically saying, I think you've got the same position as Meyer. What Meyer said before. This is,
I admire his position.
Sorry?
I admire his position.
Okay, so if we take this admirable position, I suppose that doesn't work the same way, admirable position, then okay, full disclosure, until today, I always understood the Megillah this way. Esther is cool as a cucumber, calm, calculated, understand what's going on. Esther tzadeket what she was, understood what's going on. She needed to mobilize the Jewish people to take ownership of what's going on, hence these 3-day fasts, like you mentioned. And then once she does it, it's okay, let's do this. And then she does whatever she does. She's prepared to go at personal sacrifice. But I saw this idea from Rabbi Lichtenstein today, want to share. And I think it's a very beautiful idea. And obviously there's different ways to understand the Megillah, and that's the beauty of it. And like you said, last year was one way, and maybe this year you read the Megillah in a different way. I do want to point out, though, before I mention Rabbi Lichtenstein's idea in the last 3 minutes that we have, I did see somewhere today, I can't remember what it was, I think it was the Gaon Vilna, who's got the very famous commentary on the Megillah, one of the most famous commentaries on the Megillah. Definitely worthwhile to go through that. But I think he says that you're right, it was just a breakdown of communication. Mordechai was not understanding Esther's position simply because it wasn't mouth to mouth. It wasn't face to face. It was always with a third party involved. They always talk about this about emails. Never write an email which it may come across wrong, because when it's written in writing, or it's not written in person, the body language, the way you express it, it's just not going to come across the same way. And here's a classic example, like you mentioned, where it completely messes up, where Mordechai perhaps just completely confuses where Esther is really at. But putting that aside, Rabbi Lichtenstein wants to suggest that Mordechai is really uncovering where Esther is at. And he's suggesting, he says, 1 second, you should just know that you think that the reason why you're doing this or don't want to do it is because you can't, everyone knows if you go to the king, you're just going to be executed. There's no point. We may as well strategize, think about how we can do this in a different way. And that's a very normal way of doing things. But Mordechai, in his deep insight, is telling Esther, 1 second, I want you to really reflect on what the reason is why you're not doing this. Is it really because you're scared? Is it really because it's not going to help? Or is there something deeper going on there? Is it at ubet al tidami benafshech limamet bit vamelech? Is it because you don't really care? Deep down, if you'd really care, you'd go personal sacrifice. Who cares? But if it's because you don't really care, then that's why you're giving excuses. And that's how Mordechai pounds her over the head and says, listen, I want you to know, if you think it's because of you that you can save your own skin, nah, forget that, because it's going to get to you as well. And the Jews will be saved. But you should know you're in this position for this reason, perhaps. And I think that's a really powerful idea. And I should just finish off. That's when the change happens. Esther suddenly becomes the hero. She suddenly takes a position, and suddenly she goes. She gets everyone to fast. Suddenly Mordechai is taking, instructions from her. Suddenly she's going to the king. Suddenly she tells the king this is what's happening. Then she asks the king again. She begs, she weeps, and she cries, and she does whatever she needs to do. Why? Because now she understands. Let me uncover where I'm really at. How much is there? How much cognitive dissonance is there that we have in our lives, where we kind of cover up things that we're supposed to do on very good excuses? But Mordechai is telling us in the story of Esther, saying, you should know, this is not the real truth. If you dig a little bit deeper, you'll understand it. You'll uncover the truth. You'll unmask what's really going on. You know what's really going on? You don't care enough. Because there'll always be salvation for the Jewish people. But if you want it to come from you, you've got to show that care. And I think just to wrap up, that's what we spoke about last week, that Esther beseeched the rabbis to establish this for generations. And that's why it's called Megillat Esther. Why? Because Esther understood there's a message in Megillat Esther for all of us today. That in Galut, in exile, for us to survive, we can't go with excuses. We have to go ahead and make sure that our position, whatever it is a position from the core, uncovering, unmasking anything perhaps which is covering up our real position, and that way we can really come to true salvation. Okay, we'll stop there.